Hello, my amazing, beautiful listeners. Thank you for joining me today. And I am so excited to give you this interview with Hope Ray. Hope worked alongside Dr. Ken Adams, who you remember I had him on our podcast, on my Choose to Be podcast, and aired that here a little while ago. Hope is the pioneer of betrayal violence. And in 2023, Hope established the Betrayal Violence Institute, which provides definitions and education for mental health professionals, legal systems, faith-based organizations, and general society to embrace in an effort to distinguish the conduct of betrayal violence. You can find out more about her work by going to betrayalviolenceinstitute.com. And there will be a link in the show notes because a lot of our conversation in the next 2 weeks are going to be based off of her work that you can find in the Complex Partner Trauma magazine. It is amazing. The link to purchase that publication will be in the show notes as well. Today's conversation is going to be a lot on the brain. So I'm splitting the conversation up that we had into 2 parts this week and next week. I highly recommend you pull up the free printable that Hope made for you wonderful listeners that you can find in the show notes. I think that will really help you follow along with what we're talking about today and next week. What we're talking about is groundbreaking. You will not hear this anywhere else. I am so excited to bring this conversation to you and these new terminologies, this new language to really help you better define what you all have experienced. So here's the conversation with Hope. Hope, I am grateful and so excited that you're joining me today on the podcast. And I'm in love with your work around, well, all of it, so many things, but your work, as you put it, creating new growth on an old tree and new branch for psychology to define betrayal violence has me captivated and makes my heart happy because the listeners on this podcast have had such a difficult time putting a language, putting a definition, putting a model together to describe this. And there are beautiful pieces out there. Thank God I didn't have any of that when I was going through it. So we've made so much progress that you're taking it to a whole new level. So I'm just thrilled to have met you and force you to be my friend. So I'm very, very, very glad. Like, you just don't have a choice. We got to be friends because you're amazing. All right. Today, the topic, as all of you have read, is titled WISE Femininity. But let me back up. A lot of my listeners are familiar with the term betrayal trauma. And this term betrayal violence, as you define it, better describes the experience that women like myself have experienced. This framework is, like I said, already changing the way that I coach. And it's really, really helpful. So there's going to be a lot more episodes coming around this. And I'm really excited for you listeners to hear even more about what you've experienced and put it into a lot more of a tangible framework. So first of all, I didn't prep you for this, but I actually would love for you, if you're willing, to read your poem that you wrote in the beginning of your book. I don't know if you read the poem or not.
Yeah, I do.
But I just have to tell you, I know I mentioned this, but I don't think I told you the full story. So we met at the symposium. You so generously gave me your magazine, and I'm going to have the link, y'all, to the show notes to this magazine. I've already given it to so many people. But you gave it to me, and I walked into a class, and I sat down, and I just flipped it open. And I didn't read the letter that you have to the left first. My eyes drew upon this, and tears just started to roll down my face. And I just sat there, and all I could say was, yeah. Yeah.
That touches my heart to hear it. This poem feels the same way to me. It's born out of my own experience. It's an old poem, but I wanted to include it here because essentially it's the journey, the sojourn, I call it, of going through betrayal and then being able to resurrect or rise from it. It's never about him getting better. Even if he does, you can stay in those pits for a long time. There's something really transformative that has to take place inside. And it's not because we were the cause or the broken one or contributing to all of the abusive behavior we endured. It's really just that nobody can heal us. Nobody can carry us up the mountain, right? I'd be honored to read the poem. And before I do, though, I want to just say to you, Amy, if you didn't force me to be your friend, I was going to have to do that with you. So I'm really glad you could look like the one in charge there, because the truth is I think, found ourselves to be kindred spirits so quickly in that meeting. So grateful to be here with you, and thanks for the honor.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'll dive in. This poem starts like this. It says, I trusted my intuition. I embraced my own beauty. I looked up to the sky until he ruined everything. I loved myself. I took care of myself. I nurtured a vision for the future, and then he ruined everything. I can have abundance. I can be wholehearted. I can have a good life, or so I thought, but he ruined everything. I am resilient. I am lovely. I am worthy. Nope. He ruined everything. But these words have the power to transform. So if we read it again, but this time we read it from the bottom to the top, we'll hear the same words transform. And it sounds like this. He ruined everything. Nope. I am resilient. I am lovely. I am worthy. He ruined everything, or so I thought, but I can have abundance. I can be wholehearted. I can have a good life. He ruined everything. And then I loved myself. I took care of myself. I nurtured a vision for the future. He ruined everything until I trusted my intuition. I embraced my own beauty. I looked up to the sky.
I'm seriously like fighting back tears again and hearing you read it.
It's special to me too. Yeah.
I just know our listener, like, push pause, y'all, and just sit with that. And even if you have to go back and listen to that again, I'm always encouraging that slow things down because I have such a hard time doing that. This is definitely one of those moments to push pause and just sit with that because it's very beautiful. So thank you for reading that. Okay. The very last line there, I trusted my intuition and I embraced my own beauty and I looked up to the sky. This leads really beautifully into WISE femininity because that, as you describe it, is what gets so robbed and distorted in all kinds of words to describe that beautiful vulnerability, sensitivity, and intuition that we have, that we thought we had. And when you have your reality completely distorted, so many women after divorce, and I know this is even women who stay, but we're speaking to our audience. There's so many women after divorce who don't have the context to what the hell even happened,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Then don't know how the hell to get this back because they feel like, did I have it? Wait, I thought I trusted myself. And so when they hear someone like me who says, we got to learn how to trust yourself again. We got to learn. And they're like, but I did. And that didn't work out. Right. It's really hard.
Yeah, I think that we have to give ourselves a break because you may have been operating just fine in your intuition, but your intuition tells you when something's up, but it doesn't tell you what exactly that is. It doesn't send you a letter in the mail and outline what you need to be looking for. And, when you have essential information about your well-being and safety being withheld from you, when you're restrained from knowing the things that you need to know in order to understand how safe or unsafe your ability to bond with this person is, it throws off the ability, like you said, to accurately assess your reality. So your intuition may be operating just fine, but you are working against subterfuge. You are working against somebody intentionally manipulating or controlling your reality, right? And again, I could go into the reasons that folks do that because very often there's some really sad reasons, even not just all malicious type of reasons. Nonetheless, it still constitutes violence. And so that violence certainly interrupts our ability to feel like we can rely on ourselves because while we were relying on ourselves, we were actually in the context of endangerment and had no idea. And that's the hardest part is that we continue bonding and connecting and making provision to attach to the relationship under unsafe circumstances. And I'm a big believer that our intuition is never broken, that it's always there. It's always functioning at 100%, but our relationship or our connection to it is what gets fractured in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then, as you put it, things become way out of whack. And you don't even realize, I'll just speak for myself. I didn't realize that I was way out of whack in that regard. But yet I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I thought that I was trusting my gut, but I was being told that I was wrong, or I was told that I was contributing to the problem, or I was the problem. And then what I thought I was doing, especially as a Christian woman, was doing a really good job at trying to get back in line and intact based on this false reality.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, I didn't even know what to call that. Do you have a word for that? It was just so destructive.
What part specifically? You say, I don't know what to call that. What part are you talking about?
Yeah, I don't know what to call it when you try to make yourself better. You're trying to make yourself a better person. You're trying to fix all of the things that they say that is wrong, that you're doing wrong, that is making the so-called reality of the problem.
Yeah.
And so I would read books, and I would try to become more righteous and more valiant and more this and whatever, even down to more sexual and whatever that is. But I'm trying to then fix what I'm being told is unbalanced.
Yeah.
So then I become even more, it's like a compound unbalanced. That's, I guess, where the violent word comes in, right?
Yeah. And so this is what I want the field of psychology to understand. This is why I want them to embrace the terminology of betrayal violence, because it all comes down to endangerment. And I'm going to define endangerment, and then I'm going to talk about how we have a continuum of endangerment awareness. So the definition of endangerment is the affliction to the wellness and safety of a person in a committed relationship that results from the other partner's secret fidelity violations and use of abusive behavior and communication. So endangerment means all the ways in which you are impacted by both the secret sexual behavior and the subterfuge used to keep you from knowing about it. So we do things to improve ourselves, to become more righteous. That's a great example. I can't tell you how many women I've heard say that I just felt like I needed to be a godly woman or pray for my husband. We become more sexual. We become more fit, or we sometimes go in the opposite direction where we want to just almost lay down and die because we feel like we can't surmount to what it is that we feel we're competing with. But we do these things not because we're crazy. And psychology currently doesn't understand that in a way that is non-pathologizing. It makes it look like, from psychology's current framework, women who try to improve themselves in the midst of abuse look like they are fawning or that they are codependent. But the truth is, they don't know about the betrayal. Also, they don't know about the abuse. They may sense some things. They may understand some egregious behavior or even know about some of the betrayals. But the truth is that they have had the majority of context kept from them. And therefore, they're prone, we as women in our more nurturing kind of modus operandi, we are going to be more prone to seeing how we can improve what's going on relationally. And so it is not craziness. It feels crazy. And when we realize how endangered we were, when our endangerment awareness grows and up to the point where we have adequate information to understand the depth and breadth of betrayal and deception we endured, then we begin to say, why did I act that way? We feel all sorts of awful things about ourselves, but we have to stop pathologizing ourselves in that we were just being crazy. We didn't know what we didn't know. Also, we were being lied to about being lied to, right? So there is a tremendous amount of not knowing that society needs to wake up to, because society, and I'd say most women I've worked with, maybe you feel the same here, Amy. Most women I've worked with have said to me, I would have always said, there's no way I'm going to stay or try to work out this relationship. And some women do leave right away, but I'd say the majority of folks I've worked with try for a time to see if maybe something could get better. And the truth is that surprises them because they always thought if I was being cheated on, first of all, I would know. And secondly, I would get the heck out of there. And then we spend sometimes years and in some cases decades in that position. And our self-esteem takes an unbelievable hit because of that.
Just absolutely. I love everything that you just said there. And to piggyback off what you just ended with, yes, I concur. There's women that were like, myself included. I was always in fact, I would tell them, if you ever cheat on me. Right. I was working with a client who was talking about the abuse piece that couples betrayal. And she doesn't want to see it and has a hard time acknowledging that this is part of her experience because, to what you were saying, I would never stay. I would never allow abuse. I would never accept that. So now you're sitting here wanting me to embrace this language. You're wanting me to accept that this is what happened.
Right.
I wouldn't stay in a relationship like that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is probably for a whole nother episode, but there's a multitude of reasons that women are compelled to see if the relationship can work out. Now, of course, we're talking about this in kind of cishet or cisgender heterosexual norms, which seems to be the way betrayal violence permeates society at this time, very similar to intimate partner violence, that women are bearing the burden of this. But it doesn't mean it doesn't apply to other genders, et cetera. That's also another discussion that needs to be had and research needs to be done. But the idea is oftentimes women are looking back over their actions and then really kind of, bewildered by their ability to tolerate the idea of reconciliation. And that tolerance varies according to our history and all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, there is some really common barriers a lot of women face where they want to leave, but they don't know if it would be better. They don't know if it would be better to stay or to go. And yeah, I'd love to talk more with you about that sometime because I bet most of our listeners here have had to face and think through every one of those aspects.
Absolutely. And a lot of them are divorced and still wondering if it was the right choice and still questioning their experience and still trying to put a language to what the hell happened. So no, right. So with this piece of WISE femininity, what I'm wanting my listeners to get from this is how to tap back into this or create it maybe for the first time. Mm-hmm. I know there were a lot of things, how to trust yourself. I didn't even trust myself to begin. Love yourself fiercely. I didn't love myself before I got married. So this might, for those of you listening, this might be something that's a new concept for you to begin with. And you're like, oh my gosh, I never tapped into my WISE femininity. I never really knew what my intuition was outside of what he told me it was. So either way, whatever way you're coming at this, let's start with talking about the out of whack combinations and what that can look like when you were out of whack with this vulnerability, sensitivity, and intuition.
Yeah. Well, to your point before this, yes, this would be new, right? And so I wanted just to mention that I put a booklet together for your listeners that they can see some of these definitions in front of them. So I know you'll put that in the show notes because I want you to be able to understand this concept that's abstract and there's a lot of different opinions out there. So this would be mine. And this is how I've seen it work both in my healing and the healing of countless other women and even men who I believe access WISE femininity when they're in their healthiest state. So we'll start by defining it. I mean, WISE femininity is a trifecta of 3 innate traits. So that's vulnerability, sensitivity, and intuition. And now various things can impact this. For instance, neurodiversity can create impact here, mental health conditions, trauma. But at its core, a basic healthy human brain, particularly of a female, has these traits innately, and they are not always easy to access, particularly when in trauma, or they become so potent that they are out of balance in an excessive way. And none of this would be something to pathologize. Once again, this would be something that is happening as a measure of self-protection. So I'll explain how these things get out of whack. So you have vulnerability. which is your ability to expose the true nature of your heart, your feelings, your needs, your desires, your thoughts. So an example of being invulnerable might be to say, or might be for a woman who's still married, say, to the person who abused her. And she might say, I have to always display for him how much pain I'm in because I don't want to let him off the hook. I don't want him to think that things are back to normal. And so even when I am enjoying our walk together with the kids outside and I just want to laugh because the kids are doing something funny, I'm not going to share that moment with him. And instead, I'm going to display my pain and show him the impact of all of this. And so that's reasonable, understood. But the point is that lack of vulnerability reduces her ability to experience some level of joy and normalcy. And here's why. Because if she were still married to that man, her joy and her happiness in the moment, or even her desire, say, to have sex with him, does not in any way eliminate his responsibility to rehabilitating his abusive behavior and being in recovery for his problematic sexual stuff, whatever was going on there, whether it's a sex addiction or other things involved with that. So to be vulnerable means you're able to say things like, here's how I feel. And it's a little scary maybe to expose this part of myself. And then sensitivity is the emotional activation and reactivity potential that we have. So given our trauma history, our experience, our temperament, what are the ways in which we react to deeply emotional stimulus or triggering stimuli? React meaning how do we communicate around it? How do we feel inside? How does our body's nervous system interact with this stimulus? So think of sensitivity as our ability to use our senses to kind of breathe in a situation and then to experience it both internally or what's going on in our external environment, experience that, read the room. There's a lot to sensitivity that I won't dive into now, but I call it sensitivity because it's essentially our ability to process information and have our own process about that information. And then the third thing would be intuition. And I just consider this to be the mechanism of inner knowing that really understands things without needing concrete facts or proof, like the part of us that just can understand something, but not necessarily have, all the details about it. We know something's up, but we don't know necessarily what it is. I think you and I were talking earlier. I always say intuition doesn't send you a letter in the mail and outline everything that's going on. It just says, pay attention, right? So to balance these things, they essentially need to all be in a zone of health in order to interact with each other and support each other. And when we have, say, intuition or vulnerability out of whack, too much or too little of it going on, the others will suffer in this trifecta too. And so, I like to talk about these out of whack combinations. I'll go through a few of them. Is that going to be helpful?
It really will. And like I mentioned before, when I was going through these, I realized that some of these are structured in a way for the partner that is still in the relationship. And so let's go through them. And then if you'll give me the liberty to maybe even change the language a little bit to help you listeners who are divorced understand how this can still be showing up in you. Because that's really what I want you to see with this piece, how your vulnerability, sensitivity, and intuition might be out of whack because, right, a lot of you are trying to find closure without disclosure. And you don't understand what's really going on. And so I'm hoping that as you listen to her go through how the different ways that this can be out of whack, let's really make this tangible for what might be showing up today, even though you're divorced. So anyways.
Yeah. And another way to also look at this would be to say, if you wanted to try dating again and you were thinking, oh gosh, like, how do I trust someone again? Especially if a warning bell goes off about something, you're going to struggle given your experience with having some alarm bells in that case. And so your WISE femininity is going to be your BFF there. And so you can kind of look at this in the context of new relationships too. I think it's helpful to think of intuition as always being there. It's always intact. You were born with it. It didn't die. It didn't become sickly. It didn't abandon you. It's just that our connection to it is what gets ruptured. And we have to rebuild that, especially if we're hesitant to do so. Like we don't want to trust ourselves, or we want to look too much to our external world for the answer. Then it takes a while to reconnect back to it. But what helps to reconnect to it is to have your vulnerability and your sensitivity on board. That's part of how your intuition operates really soundly. So, okay, well, here's a common out of whack combination. One that I see a lot would be having excess intuition and excess sensitivity, meaning a lot of reactivity to what you're intuiting, but very low vulnerability, meaning not allowing yourself to know what it means, or not allowing others to know what you're really thinking, feeling, processing. So I'll give an example, say for a woman, maybe who's trying to date another person, or maybe she doesn't want to date after divorce because she's scared she'll run into this. Okay. So, and this happened to me with my husband when I got married for the second time. You better believe there were red flags. I broke up with him 3 times before my grandma said she wanted to smack me on the butt, almost like, give me a spanking. She said, "Hope, you're being so judgmental. I feel like I want to wake you up to this scared little girl that's going on inside. And you really are too scared to be able to have the vulnerability that you love this man, And she didn't say much more than that, but I thought through what she said. And the truth was that I was not only drawn to him and in love with him, but very much well connected and very safe with him. But my brain was kind of latching onto some things, aspects of his past or things that he wasn't that I thought he should be in order to keep me safe. And so this is a combination that I experienced where I was excessively intuitive. Everything has meaning. Like my intuition was inflamed, right? Just reading everything as a sign, basically. And then my sensitivity, my reactivity was going off too. Yep, see, pay attention. This is what's happening. When people talk about seeing the time 11:11 on a digital clock, I've heard people say, I always see that time.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, probably you see the clock multiple times a day, but it only sticks out to you that you're looking at it when it's 11:11. And so each time that happens, you start to see or think to yourself, whoa, this is happening a lot. And the idea would be it's part of hypervigilance, right? When we are looking around for something specific, when we're looking for signs of a certain thing, we're going to be able to everything else goes gray and those colors stick out to us, right? Now, that's a self-protective mechanism, and it shouldn't be eliminated, but it should be balanced, meaning that intuition can calm down to a place of just helpful, hopeful, supportive, inner knowing instead of these alarm bells that are stressing us out. And our sensitivity can calm to a place of, I can react when it's in line with what makes sense, when it's a way for me to protect myself all the time or get to safety or prevent danger from happening, then I might have excessive sensitivity going on.
Yeah.
And then to have low vulnerability in that combination is what really throws things off, because we aren't telling ourselves what we're really thinking and feeling, as in the example I gave about my husband. My second marriage took a little time before I was able to really be real with myself about the safety I did feel in that relationship.
I love this. And what I'm also hearing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I did with Scott. Okay. But one thing stands out too is that, and maybe I didn't hear this correctly, but you were talking about how your grandma just over and over was kind of like, like she wanted to give you a little smack.
Yeah.
And doesn't that also align with this level because you're very guarded and closed off to anybody's opinion, because you're just like, no, my perspective, this is it. This is how I see it. You are not going to tell me different. And I see that show up a lot with clients who I know want to start dating again, but they're like, no, you don't, your perspective sucks. No, they're just very straightforward in how they see things, how they're sensing their reality, and not letting the real emotion, that vulnerability really come forward. Because if they got vulnerable they really do want to be in a relationship. They really do want someone to share their life with, which reminds me of when Scott and I first started dating. I'll keep it just super short. Essentially, I did this to him. He told me that he was going on a date with somebody else. And I was like, not willing to be vulnerable and share with him how that made me feel, because we had been spending a lot of time talking and communicating and starting to get a little bit invested. And then he was telling me how he was going out with somebody else. And I'm not going to let him know that how I feel about that. So guess what? We're done.
Yep. Bye. Yep.
You know what? Go ahead and date other people. I think you need to date other people. I think you need to know what the hell you're doing, because you obviously don't know what you're doing.
It wasn't that funny.
Yeah. Right? And I was just like, but it came across like my intuition was telling me that he's not ready. And my gut's telling me this, but really? Yeah. Anyways, that's what came to my mind as you were talking. I'm like, oh.
Two things you're highlighting there that I just love. In this combination of excess intuition and sensitivity with low vulnerability, that's exactly what happens, is that we overtrust our internal experience and we aren't open to the environment or advice around us. Right. And so we depend on our inner sensibility so much so that it isn't able to be influenced by our external world very much. And that creates a problem because we're operating out of our own. Honestly, it can be like a bullheadedness out of self-protection. We're like, I am not going to tolerate this or deal with that. And so we just move forward, but it goes against our best interest at times because we aren't being real with ourselves. We're very in touch with our deepest place of feeling and emotions. We're really trying to callous over those in order to make strong and smart decisions. But the other thing you highlighted is the opposite or the inverse of this, which I love, which is when you have like, what was it? An example from my relationship came to my mind too, where I was trying to play it off like things don't bother me, right? It was like I shut my intuition down a bit and my vulnerability was way down. And even my sensitivity was on the low end. I was just muted across the spectrum or the trifecta. And I would be with someone who was not really where there may have been red flags. And I didn't want to react to it because I felt maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I'm too spidey sense oriented, or maybe I'm just feeling deeply or being too vulnerable because of what I've been through. So maybe I can toughen up a little by muting this aspect. So sometimes the imbalances can all be on the same end of the continuum too. But that happens to us when we try to sustain or make our way through situations that we feel we should be able to tolerate. But really, we don't want to be. It's not actually in our best interest.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is so good. So many. I'm going to keep moving on because my brain's going 1,000 directions. Okay. The next out of whack combination that you articulated, the excess sensitivity and vulnerability, and then low intuition.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about that one?
Yeah, this combination is like constant emotional activation that can really move into oversharing with unsafe people or leaning into kind of old modes, even ones that you may have healed from or patterns you've extracted yourself from, or sometimes settling for crumbs in order to help regulate your system. So excessive sensitivity and vulnerability, but really low intuition means you're not really listening to the dignity with which you desire to be treated, or you're settling for things that help you feel better in the meantime, whether that's a coping mechanism or a way you're being treated by, say, your partner or a family member. And you're allowing yourself then to just kind of, I'm putting this in air quotes, but regulate your system by having something versus nothing. Because if your intuition were more engaged here, it might tell you to move on or to set a boundary or to stand up for yourself or to withdraw somehow from this situation. And then the fear of what you would be left with, aloneness, nothingness, emptiness. We think that's so intolerable that we'd rather just have maybe just a little crumb because at least we can kind of satiate for the moment on that.
Okay, so where I see this showing up, and tell me if I'm accurate here, but what came to mind when I read this one with women who are trying to navigate the dating world again is that they're online. I totally did this, y'all. But you're online and you're going through and you're looking and you get to this place where this is where, like you mentioned, settling for crumbs. You're like, maybe I could get past that and okay, fine. Click. Oh shit, we're a match. All right. Guess I have to respond now. It's better than nothing. That's what I'm seeing or relating that experience to this level. Would that be accurate?
Oh, it's beautifully put. Intuition reminds you of your worth and your dignity. Intuition helps align you and your actions and the things you allow into your life with what you desire, what your best interests are. Now, that's not to say that when we experience abuse, it must just be because we had broken intuition. Now, abuse is an atrocity that when it happens to you, it actually does peck away at the intuition. That's one function of abuse. But intuition is always there. I mean, when you think about Viktor Frankl, who's one of the most famous Holocaust survivors, he talks about the one thing no one could ever take away from him was his thoughts, right? Like his ability to think about important things, meaningful things that brought him joy and love, even in the midst of his circumstances. And that's how intuition is. It's this ability for you, no matter what suffering you're in the midst of, to know what your life could be like, should be like, what you deserve, how important you are. It's just part of our inner knowing.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. And this is why one of the things that I'll tell my clients who are starting to date again, I just want you to get online and I want you to practice saying no. I just want you to go through and I want you to listen to your intuition and whatever comes up first, like even if it's, if you notice your body even just do this or this, I want you to just trust it and swipe. Nope. Don't second guess, nothing, to help pull them out of what can often happen in this out of whack level that we're talking about. So anyways, it's
love it.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sometimes we do have gut reactions and oftentimes we'll test those. So we'll test our intuition, and it's not bad to run your intuition through your vulnerability and your sensitivity for sure. But when we don't trust the things that we're feeling and we want our intuition to be louder, stronger, more clear, then we're essentially not allowing it to function as it is. And we're applying all these stipulations to our intuition and therefore shutting it down. So I love what you're saying about that, like gut instinct. I certainly had that with my husband when we met online and we were just talking about that. I saw his eyes in a picture and
did you really? Yes, it was his eyes. And I went, like, it took my breath away.
Oh my gosh. How funny.
See, I knew we were soul sisters.
Well, and this is something I would have balked at if I heard myself talking like this, right? Like, I would have thought this is cheesy and weird and love at first sight-ish, and that's okay. I actually have a friend who had a love at first sight thing, and it's real, man. But I used to think that this was not so much of a thing, but my experience was very intuitive. And when I found this picture of this man and his eyes, I liked him. Like there was something about him I liked. And I don't remember any other pictures being like that. But here's what I'll tell you. Our two children have his eyes. And there's something very particular about their eyes is that they can't open their eyes very wide. It's really cute little trait they have. And so they can raise their eyebrows big, but like their eye slits stay the same size. And it's so dear to me how much they resemble him. And I wonder if maybe like the eternal or intuitive part of me, when I saw his picture, knew that's my family. You know, I don't know. But intuition is a thing.
It is such a thing. It's a beautiful thing. And when you are not out of whack, you can lean in and trust that. And the thing is too, like, oh, I'm kind of blown away because that's my experience. And I don't tell people that because it does sound like, all right, lady.
Yeah. Well, lady, all these listeners now know your secret in mind.
I know, right? I'm like, no, but listen, this is the thing. Oh my gosh. But anyways, I don't know what I was going to say. Whatever. We'll move on. My brain is just like sometimes farts up. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Something that I also thought of when I was going through this and thinking about women in these situations, my listeners. because like you say, the combination produces a result of a woman who is in constant emotional activation and reactivity. And so then they can start to overshare with unsafe people, and also lean back into that PABC, that partner adaptive bonding cycle, which, like I mentioned before we hit record, I am completely re-recording my episode that I was doing on trauma bonding because of this term that you just so beautifully gave the world. In this out of whack state, they can move into more of this PABC, which has been dubbed as trauma bonding, but I'm not going to call it that anymore. So that can also, if I'm understanding you correctly, creep back up when they're in this state.
Yeah, absolutely. So this particular combination, we have excess sensitivity and a lot of vulnerability going on, but very low intuition. You're not being guided by your internal self very much, means that you're looking at others as more right than looking at yourself as right. So your external world is speaking louder, say, than maybe your internal world to some degree. And you're relying on the input of others or the environment around you for truths about yourself rather than being able to look within. And so what that can do for somebody that is still in the relationship with their partner or is divorced or might even be co-parenting with their partner, what it can do is it thrusts them back into the adaptations they made in their bonding to their partner. So for instance, our bonding to our partner gets manipulated by the deception and the betrayal that we're experiencing. And especially before we know the full context of our endangerment, we continue to bond, not out of insanity, but out of lack of knowledge that we are truly unsafe. And even if we do know to some degree we're unsafe, there's enough deception going on that we can't accurately assess our safety and well-being. And so we will make attempts to bond or to connect, and those adaptations that are construed around some of these awful dynamics don't necessarily go away when the relationship ends. And we can fall back into some of those adaptations, whether it's with a new partner or, like we're taking a look at our family of origin, realizing with our dad who cheated on our mom that we've got an adaptation or a bonding thing going there that is influenced by this. And so when our intuition is low and we're being steered more by our external world, especially if our external world all kind of looks betraying like or misogynistic or whatever, we can adapt to that again and even bring up old ways of connecting with that or tolerating that or getting through that. So we have to detox from some of those ways. And the best way I think to do that is to be able to have your intuition and your sensitivity and vulnerability all kind of functioning in good balance with each other.
Amen. Beautifully said. So good. Oh my gosh. It's blowing my mind. All right. And then the last one, the excess sensitivity. So lots of reactivity and then low vulnerability and intuition.
Mm-hmm.
What would that look like?
Yeah. I mean, I've been here. This is an example of where someone who's raging out, finding themselves acting way outside of their character, potentially becoming physically aggressive, throwing in breaking things or hurting her partner or whatever. Or maybe if she's not partnered with him at this point, she's picking up old habits or smoking too much or over drinking or constricting herself with food or scrolling a lot. And again, these aren't things that I would say are just stupid and crazy and unreasonable. In fact, these are things that would make sense. And if somebody's got a lot of sensitivity, but not very much vulnerability and intuition going on, then they aren't really knowing what's going on inside of them, but they're feeling a lot. Now, why are they feeling a lot? Because there's trauma, like significant attachment injury and traumatic impact that they've sustained. And at times, sometimes we have to just numb out from it because it's hard to make heads or tails of what's going on. So it can feel sometimes like, I don't know anything. I don't know what to do. I don't know what the point of life is. And I'm sick of feeling so much. So this is where people would be prone to either coping in ways that aren't really in line with their character or channeling this energy into things that are not really who they want to be, rage or dating people that they don't want to really be dating or allowing themselves to participate in things that aren't really part of best self.
And revenge.
Oh yeah. Revenge could be part of that. Yeah. Channeling that energy.
Yeah. I'm wondering if this fits into this, because as you were talking, I thought about how I was in this state of feeling a lot of rage, angry, upset, just like you said, acting out of character, acting in ways that I'm like, that's not really me. Or I'd walk away from a situation and I'd be like, why did you just do that or say that? Like, it felt so out of character in my marriage that I would do this. And a lot of it was because I had no idea of what really was going on. So I had lots of reactivity, right? But my vulnerability was shut down and my intuition had been interjected with his abuse and his lies and his deception. And so that's why I was reacting that way. And I'm wondering if this falls under the category, you know how like you'll hear people say, well, I'm in a relationship with an abuser. Well, she abused too. She punched him. She went off and hauled off and hit him. So she's abusing him too. And we're like, no, there's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's coming to my mind in this particular category. Did any of that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. This is where a lot of women can get confused, especially if they're also experiencing intimate partner violence alongside betrayal violence, where characteristically IPV is going to be more about subduing a woman and establishing dominion over her and reducing her autonomy and increasing her reliance on him. That's a different use of power and control than in betrayal violence, where the use of power and control is essentially evasive to restrain her from knowing about secret sexual behavior and infidelity type of behavior. And both are violence, but they are done in different ways. The methods can be similar, deception, coercion, stuff like that, but there is a different intention essentially and a different use of the power and control, both extremely damaging. But here's the deal, like, we're not saying that when your wise femininity is out of whack that you just need to get better and fix yourself or you have a problem. If it's out of whack due to trauma, that would make sense. That would be reasonable. And the only reason that I think it's important to acknowledge these out of whack combinations is not to say, woman, get your shit together, is to say, hey, here's your lifeline. He can't heal you. And even if you were to extract from this abusive situation, that won't heal you either. The pain, the trauma doesn't disappear along with the relationship, although some things can resolve because the relationship no longer is ongoing. The trauma itself still needs your attention. And here's your lifeline. You could take a look at the combinations or the balance of these three innate traits you have and figure out if one or more of them are operating in general accordance with each other, because that's going to be a good day for you. And so on days where you're experiencing one of these combinations, you can take a look at what can I do to feel better? That's essentially what this is about. And so leading back to your question, if in this combination of extremely sensitive and having low vulnerability and intuition going on in that moment and acting outside of your character, you may be abusive. You may, give him a black eye or break his tooth. And that is consequential for sure. But we have to look at the power differential. Did you suddenly become more powerful than him? Perhaps in that moment, but who maintains power in the relationship? And who continues to misuse that power and control? So yeah, it's not good for anybody to hit. It's just not how we're supposed to treat other humans, right? But in these moments, this is where a lot of people like to talk about reactive abuse. And here's the thing. When we're acting out of character, it can pain us and it can inform us of areas that we need help or support or the ability to introspect. But at the end of the day, when somebody has been subdued by another person's power and control, especially for years, about essential information regarding her safety and well-being, and then she enacts physical violence out of that, we don't say that that's no big deal, because especially for her, that's traumatic, especially if he uses that against her and it makes her think she's just as bad as he is. It's not that it's no big deal, but it's not that the abusive roles have switched. And we have to be very clear about that, because if we aren't, it's victim blaming.
Amen. Yep. Okay. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
All
I'm
right.
glad you talked about it.
All right, everyone. I am pushing the pause button here. Yes, the conversation continues. In fact, there's another 30 minutes of our amazing conversation where we start to move from talking about how this wise femininity is out of whack and what that can look like. And next week, we're going to move into the conversation around the different zones of impact when your wise femininity is intact and what that can look like. It's an amazing conversation that I will air next week, but I wanted to split this one up because there's so much content. And if you're like me, your brain is probably already trying to conceptualize everything that we just talked about the last 50 minutes. So my challenge to you is to go back and listen to the conversation, maybe again, maybe certain parts of the conversation that we talked about that really resonated with you or that you need more insight around. And feel free to email me about any of this if you have further questions or you want to know more or have us talk more about a certain aspect of betrayal violence and around wise femininity. The pamphlet that Hope created is going to be in the show notes with this week and next week. I think that will really help to have kind of in front of you around the conversation we had today and also next week. I think you're really going to be able to relate to the zones of impact and the post-divorce adaptive bonding cycle that we talk about as well. So thank you for joining the conversation. We will see you next week. And remember, you are the chooser in your life and you get to create the life that you want because you can. Take care, everybody. If you are feeling ready to share your story in a safe place where women understand and get it as part of your healing journey to owning your story, then reach out to me. The link will be in the show notes to join me for an interview and share parts of your story where you chose to have an empowered divorce. And for anyone needing additional support and help, be sure to check out all of the latest programs and resources that I have available to help you in your journey towards an empowered divorce. Well, hello, my amazing listeners. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in for part 2. Hopefully you've been able to take some time to listen to part 1 with my conversation with Hope Ray. And again, any questions or follow-up conversations you'd like us to have, please feel free to email me. Pull up the free PDF that Hope created for all of you wonderful listeners around wise femininity that will help you kind of follow along today with our conversation. We're going to be talking a little bit more about what post-divorce partner adaptive bonding cycle is, and we're going to be talking about what wise femininity looks like when you are leaning in and trusting it and it's not so out of whack. Again, it's going to be an amazing conversation. I hope you enjoy. Here we go.
What I'd like to do is just go through the wise femininity in the zone of impact in the PABC and walk through those.
Okay.
And I just made some of my own personal notes, like how I see divorced women implementing that. And
what if you go through those? And if I have anything to add, I could.
Okay. Yeah, I would just love to know your opinion, your thoughts, and if you have anything more around that. So this is really just how to cultivate and tap into your wise femininity, which again, I love this term. So you categorize Wise femininity and zones of impact. So the way that I see this can look for women after divorce is support groups and getting support from other women that have also experienced this, so that your experience, you don't feel so crazy. You don't feel like you're the only one. You feel a little bit more like, oh, okay, someone else gets it. I see coaching, therapy with those that understand this concept. Please, 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 or you can have more damage. But coaching, therapy, and this one I feel actually really passionate about, learning to say no around things that will trigger you, that are going to be triggering to you. Learning to say no to even maybe family members where you're like, that's not going to be a situation that's going to support my healing at this time. So I need to say no. That would fall under the zones of impact for me. Anything in addition to that you can think
that's
of?
an awesome list. And let's just pause on saying no really quick, because I want to apply really nice, healthy, balanced, wise femininity to just how difficult it can be to say no. Let's say to a family gathering. If you have a family gathering that you need to say no to, and your sensitivity reacts to it like, this is hard, I just would rather go and get it done with, it would probably be no big deal. But your intuition is saying, yeah, but then you're going to be in the position to have to tolerate this, or to experience this, or to be triggered in this way, or to have to put on this face. And that isn't working so well for you right now. And then your vulnerability is saying, yeah, and you don't really want to be feeling that way right now. And then your intuition is saying, plus, you don't have to worry that your worth or value or is impacted by you doing this hard thing and making people upset with you. In fact, if they're upset with you, then essentially they're not very supportive of what you need right now, and you're still okay, So like, this is how these sweet parts of us can talk to each other, especially when they're all zoned in and awake to the thing. Then they're able to interact with each other and balance each other out to give us the best possibility of making the best decision.
Yeah, I love how you broke it down that way. So really what again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm still wrapping my head around a lot of these concepts, but what I'm also gathering for you around zones of impact is really being very intentional with where you're placing yourself and utilizing these beautiful parts of sensitivity, vulnerability, and intuition to assess those zones, those areas of your life with people. Even if it's just you're going to a baseball game, like whatever that is, where is this safe? And how can I use this wise femininity to create that safety in these areas of my life that I could be impacted?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay.
And a quick note about zones of impact. That's the domains of somebody's health and wellness, that sustained impact from the betrayal, violence, the deception, and the secret and repeated sexual violations.
Okay. Love it. All right. The wise femininity in the PABC. So what I thought around that, and again, that's what I'm now going to, instead of partner adaptive bonding cycle, that I think I know women experienced, I am now going to call, tell me what you think about this, post-divorce bonding cycle.
Ooh, got it. Okay.
What do you think about that?
So essentially a way to talk about the partner adaptive bonding cycle when you're no longer partnered with the person. Yeah. I mean, I love it. I think that that's a whole thing. The partner adaptive bonding cycle, the way that I see it, isn't dependent on the status of the relationship. More so, it's the adaptations that we make. And when we heal those adaptations, especially if they were made in a context of endangerment, then it doesn't really depend on that person. But if we're still with that person, it's harder to heal, especially if our healing is not matched by theirs, right? And we've out-healed or outgrown them. So post-divorce, it does look very different. The partner adaptive bonding cycle, especially with new partners or other people in your life, like say your in-laws that now you're divorced from, but you're still picking your kids up from their house or something like that. your bonding cycle related to the trauma doesn't necessarily go away when the relationship does. So I like this idea of this post-divorce version of that, because there are very particular experiences involved with that. I would love to see what you outline and what your listener feedback might kind of share about their feelings there.
Yeah, it's definitely, and I'm in this place where I'm like, they're wanting to know what they're experiencing that's been categorized and dubbed as trauma bonding. But now with this new term, I'm like, ooh, no, this is really what's happening. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. And so I don't know how much longer. I'm just going to have you come back and help me work through that and do another podcast on it. But it has to be talked about. I know that this is going to resonate with so many divorced women and help them understand what is going on. Because again, it's like, I don't want to be in a relationship with him. I hate him. I mean, that was my experience. Like, I cannot say this on air, so I'm going to totally block this out. But I was giving God ideas on how to take him out.
Yeah. Oh,
I was like,
unusual.
I did not, but I hear that he's dating someone and I'm in my closet sobbing.
Yeah.
Or, right? All of those pieces. And you're going, what is wrong with me? I don't want him back. Why am I feeling this way? And trauma bonding just doesn't really
So
match up.
That's a perfect example of the partner adaptive bonding cycle post-divorce, because what's happened is, especially if you chose the divorce, you went and incited an attachment injury for yourself. So the betrayal, the deception, all the violence there already creates an attachment injury. But to sever the relationship by your own choice creates an additional attachment injury in the context of deep attachment injury. So we look at that as what we had to do or what was best for us, but then we can be faced with a lot of regret because the pain outlasts the relief there. And there's still a sense of, okay, even though I'm safe, I'm missing him, or I'm really jealous that he's moving on with his life, or that he appears to be getting better. And this woman that he's dating is getting to reap the rewards of that. And she's around my children now. These are experiences that all have to do with the fractured attachment, that rupture we actually created a lot of times, which is another layer of it. And even if we didn't choose the divorce, the idea is we were already suffering tremendous abandonment and attachment injury. And then we are now set off to sea alone, loaded up with all this cargo, and it's not fair, first of all. And secondly, we're often without enough information to help resolve what our hunches were back then and the ways in which we were endangered and lied to. So we have to do a tremendous amount of letting go in divorce. And we're reaping no reward after going through all that. There's nothing to show for it other than, well, now I'm miserable,
Right.
So it's confusing to be in that place.
So confusing.
Yeah. And we wonder why we even care anymore. Like the way he treated us, we should be totally over it. But it also is, betrayal violence has a way of bringing up other attachment injuries too. For me, I was examining how stuck I was on my first husband post-divorce until I realized that, this is an old story in my life before I even met him, that I would not be chosen by someone I want to be chosen by. And I'm really wanting that experience from him. It's less about who he is and how much I actually care for him. It's more about, you can't do this to me. I must rectify this type of mistreatment. I can't tolerate it. It's a cardinal wound for me.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. That's a whole other episode, but there's something very real there. And again, I'm really grateful for the language to be able to help better articulate what these women are experiencing. So a couple of thoughts that came up for me in this WISE Femininity around the PABC is not engaging in conversations that are anything outside of the facts. And I would even go as far, sometimes I'll even suggest, if it's not in the divorce decree, Like, legally you're not going to be held accountable if you just follow that divorce decree, follow the parenting plan to the letter. Don't engage in any of the back and forth emotional pieces because you're just attaching again when you do. And so really limiting your engagement is going to help you hold on to your wise femininity is something that I think fits into that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great tactic when you feel a lot of reactivity or a lot of sensitivity or even vulnerability where you just really want to be known. That's a good tactic to use is, letting intuition pull you back from filling it all out there or letting your actions go into overdrive of connection.
Yeah. So when you start to detect any of that anxiousness and like that need to respond when it's not necessary, then I think just getting curious, asking yourself those questions like, is this really my business? Is this really something? I mean, again, I totally did this, but doing detective work on the new girlfriend or sitting there when he's texted you a message and you know that you really don't need to answer and he's just baiting you and you notice that anxiousness to want to respond, or there's so many times where I'd want to respond a certain way. Again, you're re-engaging in that, I think, PABC. And so just be aware of when that anxiousness to respond or do some detective work or hypervigilant, whatever that is, bring it back a little bit.
There's a message there, right? And your intuition is part of that detection service along with your vulnerability and your sensitivity. But my wise femininity is part of how I understood those types of behaviors on my part. Because if I didn't get curious about them, like you're saying, then I would have just thoughtlessly continued or whatever, put myself in places that were really detracting from my healing when I was pretty desperate to feel better,
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that you can think of in this category?
Man, I guess we could talk about self-betrayal a moment. And that's a strong word, but I think that post-betrayal and in the midst of so much trauma, we do often reach for things, whatever works. And that makes sense. And I've never met a woman that I've worked with who's been through this significant type of trauma. And this is severe. There is nothing to take lightly about this type of experience. I've never met a woman who hasn't found herself in some territory that didn't feel right or didn't feel in line with her character. And we do want to eventually address those things. Why? Because we want to live a life that we want to live. We want to be in a place that we want to be, not in a place that we feel is subpar or beneath us or outside of who we're designed to be or want to be. So that's why we address these things. We don't address these things, these areas that are detracting from our healing rather than really moving us closer or moving the needle on our healing. We don't address these things because we need to be healthy women or do the right thing or stop being so pathological or whatever. Like we do it just because that's where our peace is. That's where our healing is. And so if anything that we've talked about so far in today's episode had a note of here's where you have some control. Now, there are things, despite having been ravaged in our lives by things we never signed up for or asked for, there are areas that are within our own domain of control that are powerful. Just like Viktor Frankl said when he was completely imprisoned. There are certain things that we can manage that are going to make a powerful difference for our healing. And that's why I talk about these things, because I want women to have tools. One thing to set boundaries. It's one thing to take care of yourself and do self-care. It's another thing to get to these deeper concepts that allow us to make the decisions that we need to make with great precision so that we're putting one foot in front of each other or one foot in front of the other heading toward healing,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, for sure. I love this. I'm going to go back and re-listen to this episode and hear you again. I'm not kidding.
You make me feel super cool when you say that. Okay.
You are super cool. Oh, I just love that. Okay. Now you have in here wise femininity in dialects. And I was going through that and I was thinking about the divorced woman and I added wise femininity in co-parenting.
Love it. Let me hear your thought.
And so, yeah, what I was thinking about was not questioning your own thoughts if they don't align with his. Not questioning your thoughts about the children. Okay, here's an example that came to mind. So again, when you've experienced betrayal violence and even intimate partner abuse is coupled with that, which is a lot of my clients and my listeners, when you're co-parenting, that behavior, those tactics are still used and can throw you out of whack to your wise femininity. And so when they don't have control over you anymore in that relationship, then they will start to control you through co-parenting, through the children. And now you might have been questioning your sanity or your voice or your opinion or your thoughts in the marriage. Now the same pattern is happening, but it's around the children. And so that's what came up for me when I was thinking about this within the realm of co-parenting. Again, maybe this doesn't fit, but the example that I'm thinking of is he lived maybe an hour and a half away from the kids. So I was taking them to school. I was doing the parent-teacher conferences, whatever. I registered them for school, so I get all of the emails and the notifications of what's happening in their class, right? And I was being blamed for him not being aware of what was happening in the school. And I started to question my thoughts about how that should or shouldn't look around co-parenting. Rather than stepping back and tapping into my wise femininity and putting the control back where it belongs, you have the ability to log on and put your email in and get the same notifications that I'm getting. I started questioning myself. So I don't know if that falls in line with what you're trying to point out here, but that's what came to my mind.
I love that. Yeah. So in that place of balanced wise femininity, your intuition is able to say, I have no role here that I did not play. Like there's nothing here that I have left undone. And your intuition is also able to say, I think he's throwing more of that stuff at me, right? And your reactivity, your sensitivity is able to sense and understand that this is maddening to me. So definitely not something to engage with, right? And your vulnerability is able to say, I don't want to be feeling this. I don't want to be in this struggle with him. This is making me question myself. And then your intuition's kicking back in and saying, yeah. And as you question yourself, a thorough inventory tells us there's nothing you left undone here and da, 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 da. So after you have this internal wise femininity dialogue throughout the day in conscious thought, in non-conscious thought, then you find yourself saying to him, oh, I'm sorry, do you not have the logins for those things? Because I have my own. You'd probably have to call the school to get your own, but that's probably the easiest way for you to be able to see the calendar and all the events on there.
Exactly. I love it. The other thing that there's several, but I'll just mention one more for time's sake. But one more that came to my mind is that when you're co-parenting, to reframe, tapping into your wise femininity and having that balance is not trash talking him and not talking about him behind his back, because it's just going to throw you out of whack. You're getting right back into that cycle. You're getting out of whack with all of those emotions too. But that was one thing that I know was a huge empowering way to move forward and let go of any of that unhealthy bonding cycle and those patterns, was to stop talking about him.
Holy cow, that's so amazing. Yeah, there's people who kind of use the phrase, he's occupying space in your head or living rent free in your head or whatever. And I think there's some value to that kind of idea. And what you're saying makes perfect sense, that the energy spent on characterizing him verbally in words was not contributing to your peace, right? So that's where your trifecta, when it's all engaged and it's all operating in function of each other, it's saying to you, vulnerability wise, here's what I'm feeling. And when I'm talking about him out of just anger, I'm trying to channel out some of what I'm feeling, but there's also other feelings in there, like abandonment or maybe embarrassment or whatever, unresolved or painful things that could be in there as well. So I'm really spending a lot of time in that area, but I'm not being as vulnerable as I want to be. And your intuition saying, yeah, this isn't profiting you very much? Like, is this really in line with how you want to be spending your time? Do you feel better after you talk like this? Are you generating a consensus with someone to feel more empowered? Is this really what you need? Or are you okay just as you are without having this conversation? And back and forth, right? I love that idea. And I think that's a really powerful tip to pass along to anyone post-divorce, that especially in front of children or family members, it can be essential for them to know information that they need to know. But when we find ourselves offloading the way we feel, it often creates a look that we don't realize. And that look is that we are angry, we can't let go, that perhaps we did have more to do with why the divorce took place than people thought. And we never want to give that impression either. Like, we want to protect our reputation.
Yes.
So
yeah. Well, it's like when the kids come home from his house and they're making comments about what's going on over there. That's another way that I see this showing up too, is really you got to tap into that wise femininity here as well, because that can bring up a lot of emotions, a lot of that vulnerability that you're probably not really wanting to look at, because if they're going on a vacation that you could never afford to go on, you're going to have a lot of emotions about that, and you might shove that down and it's going to throw you out of whack. So when these things happen, you've got to take time, slow down, and get really curious about each of these parts and see them. And
that's right.
A lot of that.
In one situation, your wise femininity might say it's good for you to be completely transparent about how you feel about this vacation they're going to take. In another, your intuition might say, but this isn't the time or the place or the way you want to do that. Or the ages of your children aren't old enough at this point for you to really give way into what this experience is like. They wouldn't understand it. So wise femininity allows us to be specific in our specific situations. And sometimes that looks different. That's why there is no right and wrong thing to do. There's like a lot of tips we can give women who've been divorced or who are separated, heading toward divorce. But at the end of the day, there is no roadmap. Your roadmap is your internal guide. It has to be, because every situation is different. And even when you're in the same scenario, but in a different setting, the way that you should approach that setting versus the other one could be completely different. And your guide really needs to be a combination of what you feel and know about yourself and your innards, plus what you're experiencing in your environment. And so, yeah, I just love this stuff. I love talking about it. And these examples you gave are awesome. I think you should keep going and write a book on just specifically how it could look to balance your wise femininity in these areas.
Well, it's on my bucket list.
Okay, cool.
Okay, the last one is the wise femininity and reflective calibration. So gratitude, even just for a moment. And I definitely can testify that at some point I did tap into gratitude, and that's a whole story for another day. But it really did make a big shift. I felt it in my body because I started to calibrate with my wise femininity. So being grateful for what you have. And let me tell you, it started off with just, I'm glad that my kids are healthy. I'm so grateful that I have laundry soap. I'm so like, this doesn't have to be, I'm not saying you have to be grateful for this hellacious experience. And I need to be grateful that this isn't like the crumb looking. This really is just, what do I have available to me that eases my life or brings joy to my life? So just wanted to put that out there. But gratitude. And then the other one was hold on to memories that you own, that you created from your thoughts, even if now your reality wasn't really the reality, what you did know and believe, and you had thoughts, beautiful thoughts and emotions about it. So hold on to those beautiful memories rather than believing that those memories that you had in that relationship are now tainted. A lot of times we want to chuck all of those away and everything was false and everything was fake. I know why you're saying that. I said it too. And yet you still, in that moment with what you did know, consciously choose to have thoughts and feelings of love and excitement and fun and playfulness. And those are yours to keep. Those aren't his. He has nothing to do with them. So that came up for me as well. Any thoughts about that so far?
Oh my gosh. I love it. I'm a big fan of commending ourselves for the amazing loyalty and commitment and investment we offered, even in situations where we were being mistreated and didn't know it, right? And in times where we knew we were being mistreated but didn't know how badly, I commend us and think we should commend ourselves. And in cases then where we were being so mistreated that at some point it was no longer workable, tolerable, or we weren't capable of staying, we should commend ourselves. And then for women who are in positions where they have barriers there and they cannot leave, but it is no longer tolerable, and they feel like their only option is just to lay down and acquiesce to it all and emotionally die, I commend those women too, because at the end of the day, what they're doing is being stronger than anyone knows. Is it the right decision for them? Is it the safest decision for them? I suppose only every woman can figure that out for herself. And it's easy for society to judge, but we don't understand the nuance until we're there. And so I love what you're saying about just looking over our memories and the things we've done well, the way in which we were benevolent and kind and genuine, and saying, even if that was chewed up, spit out, we did that.
You loved, you were loyal, and you spent years believing that he was as well. And so, yeah, commend yourself, have self-compassion. And then the thing that I'll just end with that I thought about in this category is the hope that you, in your healing journey, have all the power, all of it. Nothing is missing. There's nothing that anybody else has that you don't already have, which is really this wise femininity concept. But you absolutely have all the power to create the outcome that you want from here on out. I love empowering women to believe that they are truly the creators of their life, and they have everything to create that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm challenged by some thinking around systemic conditions that would really create limitations there. At the end of the day, that's why I keep coming back to what Viktor Frankl says so profoundly, probably why he's one of the most famous philosophers, is that despite whatever limitations I may have physically, financially, or even health-wise, with however many days I have left on this earth, and no matter how much, to what degree someone is controlling my fate, there's one thing they can't take from me. And unfortunately, if that's all you have in life, however, is the freedom to your thoughts, that is a greatly reduced existence, and it's not fair. Every human deserves free autonomy. But I think there is a range there. There is a scale or a continuum of freedom, and it depends on what kind of cultural or systemic issues you may be up against. And it could depend on the resources you have access to or not. And so at the end of the day, I so agree that every woman has the capability to dream and desire where she wants to go. And to actualize that, well, that can be a different story at times, depending on what you're up against. But when it comes to being divorced and moving beyond the pain that someone else thrust into your life from their sexual betrayal and their deception over time, I absolutely believe that you can heal from that, regardless of whether or not you can afford therapy or if you've read all the books or done all the groups. I absolutely believe we have what we need inside of us to heal from that. And those things that are inside of us that help us heal are also the things that experience injury and impact. And so we have to recoup them from that injury because they're essential items in our forward journey.
Yeah.
I love how you put it.
No, they're so essential. And it starts with just that little shift.
Mm-hmm.
No, you might be limited, like you're saying, you might be limited. You might be limited in geographically. You can't move, you can't whatever, right? Because now you're divorced and co-parenting. And so you're limited by that external. So you, rather than submitting to that fact, it's going inside and, okay, what can I create? If this is what I'm given, then what can I create from that and make beautiful? And I just believe that women have the ability to make beautiful wherever they're at, no matter the external limitations, or even living in, because come on, look at what we've done so far with living in a white male patriarchal world. Like, we can still find beauty, but it starts with the belief that you can, even if it's in this much of a space. You're talking about, and so many amazing stories with people who lived in these concentration camps, but you're starting with even a limited physical space, just with the belief and the switch to empowerment is what can grow your space. You don't think it can, and you might believe that it's a fact that you're limited, but if you settle with that fact, you truly are limited. But if you can shift that to a more empowering thinking of like, okay, well, what can I create with this? Then I just have been witness over and over too many times to deny how that actually grows. And they would have never thought that it could have grown, but it does, because you started to become the creator, even if it's in this little space.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to momentum, which is imperative for any sort of growth when we're in a stuck place or a one down place, where we have to build momentum, or the climbing, the pulling up of one arm stretch after another, upward, until we get to a place where we're in a flow, and while that flow can be emotional or psychological or physical, depending on what areas of our life need attention and what we have access to resource-wise, I think momentum is just so powerful. I was talking about it earlier with a client who's getting great momentum, and the ability to feel good is so much easier when you're building momentum, and the journey is much more inspired when you have momentum building, and we all have the ability to create some momentum, but sometimes it takes tremendous creativity.
Yes, it really does. More stories for another day.
Right.
Okay. Hope, anything else you would love to leave our listeners with today?
Oh, I just thank you for the conversation. And there's a lot that we talked about, some of which would be more described in the magazine I just published, because, for instance, zones of impact and partner adaptive bonding cycle and dialectics and reflexive calibration, all of that is defined in that space, versus expecting you to know what that means. If you didn't know what that meant, that's because, well, it's new information, and it's okay if you didn't know what it meant. I just want to normalize that.
Yeah. And thank you again for those of you listening. Who put that together, Hope? The handout?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I have that for your listeners. I want them to be able
to do. So that's going to be in the show notes as well for you all to have. So very kind. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
thank you for starting to put a beautiful language to what we're experiencing. Can't wait to keep growing and wrapping my head around it too. So thanks for being patient with me.
Gosh, are you kidding me? This is my jam. I love talking about this stuff, and I'm so grateful for the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, girl.
Amazing, right? Okay, so there's going to be a lot more coming in terms of a workshop, hint, that's going to help you access your WISE femininity post-divorce. So be on the lookout for that coming up. And I will say that joining my Believing in You group coaching program, where you will learn tools that help you access your WISE femininity. It's an amazing way to get the coaching, get the support, learn the tools and the concepts, and then be able to practice these concepts every week and get coached around that are keeping you stuck. New spots open every 12 weeks. Check the link in the show notes to get your name on the waiting list for the next round. Thank you again for joining us today. The invitation to practice this week is, of course, accessing the trifecta of the WISE femininity, because you are the chooser in your life and you get to create the life that you want, because you can. Take care, everybody.